Ok. Hi Monica. Hi Monica. Ciao.
Hey everyone.
Hi. Okay, I think we can start. Okay. So uh, thanks to everyone and thanks especially to Maurizio for being here. So let me say a couple of words about Maurizio. Maurizio is professor of sociology of organizations at the Department of Sociology and Social Research at the University of Milano-Bicocca, and he's also visiting scholar in the Department of Sociology at New York University. Maurizio has a great merit because he was the one who kept organizational studies alive in Italy. And he did so also with many empirical researchers that focus on different topics such as the dark side of organizations, criminal organization, and organizational failures. He has published extensively in leading international journals such as Social Networks, Organizational Studies, Crime and Justice, Crime Law, and recently also in PLOS ONE with a very nice study on Andrangheta networks. He's the author of several books, including Scapegoating, How Organizations Assigns Blames, and this is today's topic, Mafia Organizations, The Visible Hand of Criminal Enterprise, and Organizational Myopia, Problems of Rationality and Foresight in Organizations, which has been translated also into Italian and Russian. So this is for Maurizio. Thanks again, Maurizio. You have something like 25, 30 minutes for your talk, and then we save 20 minutes in the end for the comments and questions. Thanks again. The floor is yours. Thanks a lot for being here.
Thank you very much. And can you see this? Yeah, the presentation. Yes. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much for this invitation. I'm very happy to be here, even if only online. I'm an organizational sociologist, and in this presentation today, I will attempt to address the topic of problem solving sociology through an organizational approach, from an organizational point of view. What I want to discuss today is a very common, but I think very often misunderstood phenomenon in organizations, scapegoating. Let me start with a simple idea. Organizations do not just fail, they also explain failure. And the way they explain it matters a lot. Very often, instead of asking what went wrong in the system, they ask who is guilty, who should be punished. And this shift from explanation to blame, from inquiry to blame, is what I want to analyze today. More specifically, I want to show how and why organizations create scapegoats, the good reasons, and what happens when they do, and why this prevents positive learning, real learning in organizations. To do this, I will use the case of Costa Concordia accident that happened in Italy in 2012, but the case is not the point. It is a lens, a way to understand a broader organizational mechanism. First of all, I would like to distinguish three different forms of scapegoat. The first one is the archetypal scapegoat. This is the classical anthropological figure. A person or an animal who symbolically absorbs the sin of a community. Think, for example, the ritual sacrifice. But the key point is this figure is innocent. And the problem, the event does not exist. And the function is a sort of collective purification, as in the Jewish ceremonies described in the Leviticus. The second figure probably is the most known figure, the innocent scapegoat. Here we move to modern societies. The innocent scapegoat is punished for wrongful or guilty actions committed by someone else. Unlike the archetypal figure, this person is not sacrificed for communal scenes, but for specific facts and events with respect to which he is entirely extraneous. A classic example is Alfred Dreyfus in 1894 in France. Dreyfus was accused of passing military secrets to the German army, but he was completely innocent. The real traitor was Major Esterhazy. In this case, in the case of innocent scapegoat is not a ritual purification, but a sort of judicial injustice. What changes in modern societies is not the existence of scapegoats, but I think their function. Now let me shift the focus on to the third type, the one that concerns us most today, the organizational scapegoat. I define the organizational scapegoat as the subject who pays for faults that also pertain to others. The organizational scapegoat is a person is not completely innocent, is somehow involved in the genesis and in the dynamics of the event. But however, his responsibility is overemphasized and the broader system disappeared. And this is crucial. Scapegoating becomes a rational mechanism of organizational self-protection. So it's important to analyze the role of blame mongers, the accusers that create the scapegoat. According to René Girard, a scapegoat is produced in unconscious way. In my analysis, in the organizational scapegoat is produced in conscious way, sometimes the planned action, is the result of intentional or emerging strategies, meaning emerging from a contingent and specific situation. And sometimes the role can be formalized in the organizational chart. So we have a sort of lightning rod, for example, the security manager, the safety manager, the financial manager, or the role can be emergent from specific and contingent situation. So the organizational scapegoat is a modern type of a scapegoat, and is the subject we are talking today. So this brings us a key question. What happens when organizations face negative events? How they respond? Negative events such as crises, failures, accidents, disasters can create serious risks for organizations. Legal risk, sanction, cost, insurance cost, organizational stigma, losing reputation. In the face of this risk, organizations generally adopt one of the two strategies. In the first scenario, the organization accepts the responsibility and engages in double-loop learning. So the final result is the organizational change. It implements deep changes designed to prevent recurrence, technical action, error correction. However, this virtuous path may produce immediate negative consequences, legal liability, reputational damage, and of course financial losses. In the second scenario, the organization shifts blame on onto individual or a group of individuals, creating a scapegoat. This strategy offers clear advantages for leadership, for the dominant coalition. It ensures organizational stability, the dominant coalition, minimizes legal exposures, and transforms the crisis into an insurance problem. And the final result is the organizational inertia, the opposite. No structural changes are required. We can say that one path, the first one, is risky but transformative. The second one is safe but sterile. And we can identify different agents playing a very important role in the creation of a scapegoat. The mass media, the judicial system. The judicial system, this is, I think, very, very important because a judicial system seeks clear responsibility, in particular the penal code that is based on individual responsibility. the media, which personalize the story, the main character of the story, and the organization, which benefits from blame shifting, because, of course, if the guilty is the person at the front end, the organization is safe. And at the same time, regulators and institutions, which often remain silent. So, scapegoating is therefore a collective process, the result of the action of many, many different actors. Now, I would like to contrast scapegoating with problem-solving sociology. It's a tentative, of course. Scapegoating closes the problem, while problem-solving sociology reopens the problem. Scapegoating is based on some questions such as who is guilty and who should be punished. So scapegoating moralizes error, protects existing dominant coalition, and prevent positive learning. Problem-solving sociology is based on a different question. No who is guilty, except for gross violence, gross negligence, but how did the system produce this outcome? Which length and conditions were at work? And what changes are required? So different analysis, different diagnosis, and different solutions, different therapy, I think. So scapegoating is not a solution. It is a form of organizational self-protection. Let's move on from the theory to the case. The Costa Concordia ship accident that happened in Italy in 2012. When the cruise touristic ship collided with a reef near the island of Giglio off the coast of Tuscany. 32 people died. The Costa Concordia was a very long ship, almost 300 meters long, with 4,200 people on board. The maximum capacity was almost 5,000, but that day there were 4,200 people on board. A very speed ship. The accident. The ship hit a rock and sank. The ship collided with the outcrop, causing a gash in the flank of the ship of about 36 meters. Why this accident happened? This on right you can see the original route, the route that the ship was supposed to follow, and on the left the new route. This movement from original route, the safe route, to the new route, very close to the coast, it's really important in this analysis. And over time, the practicing of sailing close to the coast, known as the sail by salute, the inchino, became widespread for marketing reasons, because it's very attractive for passengers to see the coast very close, and at the same time for potential future clients, to see the big ship navigating very close to the coast. The judicial truth. And of course, during this navigation, the ship crashed against the rock. The judicial truth. The Captain Catino, the captain of the Costa Concordia, the court of Grosseto, held the Captain Catino to be the main person responsible for the sinking, for the accident, and for the death of 32 people, and he was sentenced to 16 years detention. Other figures were sentenced with minor charges, 2 officers, the helmsman, the hotel director, all people on board. And just one person from the company, the head of the Costa Crociere crisis unit, for his part in the management of a post-impact emergency, in the crisis management phase that started immediately after the accident. But what is crucial here is what disappeared from the narrative, from the judicial truth, and from the narrative around this accident. according what I call the short history, this was a sort of a pathological event. Short history because the analysis, the criminal investigations took account for the short history that started at 6:27 minutes p.m. when the ship left the last port until the accident, 3 hours later. And after the crisis management phase that started immediately after the accident and ended the day after. So the total amount of time is 11 hours, 18 minutes. So the investigation was focused on this short history. And according to the short history, this was a sort of pathological event caused by a very negligent captain, a negligent crew, an incompetent captain, a sort of bolt from the blue, an unpredictable event. But I think the first phase, the incubation of the accident and the normalization of deviance phase, was almost entirely ignored during the criminal proceedings. And this phase started 20 years before, in which during this period, this practice, this deviant practice of sale by salute became very, very common. According to this long history, this was a sort of physiological event, of course, not the accident, this practice of sale by salute. And so this was a sort of predictable surprise, not bolt from the blue. The practice began on October 1st, 1993, when the practice of sale by salute, in the sense of sailing close into the coast, came into being with the Captain Mario Terenzio Palombo. On the left, you can see his book. Over time, this practice became normalized. And of course, if you do this, like in this, became normalized not only in the Giglio Island, but in all Mediterranean Sea and in many different places in the world. And of course, if you do this, the consequence can be this. So the question is, are these example of mastery or are they an example of near misses? So, normalization of deviance. A great deal of evidence shows that the sale by salute that led to disaster was not an isolated case. Rather, it was even encouraged by the company and promoted in some of its brochures. The behavior for marketing reasons. The behavior of captains practicing the sale by salute was therefore not considered deviant, but actually conformed to the rules in use. It was not wrongdoing, but normal. Who was a good captain? The captain that follows the original route, the safe route, or the captain that follows the sale by salute route? And the problem of regulator, because until 2012, there is no trace, the year of the accident, there is no trace of any regulation of the so-called sale by salute. And the captaincies, the port captaincies, the controller, had never issued any instructions to prevent or at least regulate the close to shore transit of ships of a certain tonnage. So, the normalization of deviance. This concept was introduced by Columbia sociologist Diane Vaughan in 1996 in her seminal book, The Challenger Launch Decision, about the disaster, the space shuttle disaster. And this concept means a process that generates a constant erosion of normal procedures in which violations, irregularities, and deviant practices are accepted as normal and conventional and therefore tolerated. So very, very important concept to explain this event, this accident. And let me pause here to underline a crucial point. When attention focuses only on outcomes, mainly on outcomes, the same behavior is judged differently depending on the outcome. If the outcome is good, we think that this outcome is produced by good decision-making processes. If the outcome is bad, the opposite. But the reality is different. Good decision-making processes can create bad outcome, and bad decision-making processes can create good outcome. So the outcome bias is the cognitive engine of scapegoating. To give you an example, which is the difference? On the right, you can see the Costa Concordia and the accident. On the left, the same ship with different captain, Massimo Callisto Garbarino, and this ship was navigating very, very close to the coast. The distance between the ship and the rock was less than the length of the ship. And you have to consider the inertia in movement of this big ship. They are not bicycle, of course. If the movement, changing direction, requires time. So the sail by salute was not only not seen as a potential source of danger, it was even encouraged by the company and promoted in some of its brochures. So, on the right, the accident, produced by bad decision-making processes. And on the left, near miss, a sign of danger, a warning sign, or an example of mastery. An example of mastery. The day after the left event, the mayor of the island, the Giglio Island, wrote this letter that I think is a very important document. Dear Captain, following the incredible show of last night, I could not fail to send you a message of satisfaction. We witnessed a show unique of its kind, one that has become an indispensable tradition. Not a violation, not sign of danger, an indispensable tradition, incredible show, of which I am extremely proud. I would like to send my personal thanks to you and to your crew, begging you to extend our gratitude also to the Costa Crociere Company. So this document, I think, is really, really important to understand how different actors, in this case the local bodies, perceived event such as this on the left. Not like near misses or warning signs, but like an example of a mastery. So, in the creation of a scapegoat, it's important to widen the lens, to analyze the different roles played by different actors. Scapegoating is not the work of a single actor. I think we can distinguish three types of agents. The promoters who initiate the scapegoating process, traditionally the judicial system and the mass media, because they tend to focus on the individual actor. The beneficiaries who avoid scrutiny, the company, because if the captain is guilty, of course, the company is safe. The port captaincies for the control that they didn't do. And the helpers who contribute indirectly to its consolidation. The minister, no regulation about this type of behavior. The local bodies. And another important ingredient in the creation of a scapegoat are represented by degradation ceremonies. This concept was introduced by Garfinkel many decades ago, and about 90% of articles published on this event by the most widely circulated Italian newspapers focus exclusively on the individual factor and on the figure of the captain as the cause of a disaster. In the eyes of public opinion, the captain quickly became the scoundrel of scoundrels, the bogeyman in a story that could not be any darker, human error and stupidity. So the role of the gradation ceremonies is very, very important. In the days immediately immediately following the accident, while still lacking a precise picture of the dynamics of the event, the mass media had already identified the one person responsible, the captain. Human error, the captain. In order to declaim the captain's guilt and discredit his character, media resort to a rhetoric of degradation that serves to build an image of incompetence and immorality. And as a consequence, and of course, if the captain is immoral and incompetent, probably is guilty. So, in my analysis, I tend to distinguish three different levels of failures. The individual level, of course, there were many mistakes, many errors committed by people at the sharp end. But it's important to analyze the role of organizational and inter-organizational level. At the individual level, of course, there were errors and violations. Errors are not intentional. Violations are intentional but not malevolent in this case. And errors and violations, and of course, bad behavior, overconfidence, this sort of can-do attitude. We can do this, we can move very, very close, we can navigate very, very close to the coast. Overconfidence and can-do attitude are the consequence of the normalization of deviance process. But errors and violations at individual level were embedded at organizational and inter-organizational level and are shaped and provoked by upstream workplace and organizational factors, the latent factors. At the organizational level, drift to danger, this process of normalization of deviance, the incentives for sale by salute. So sale by salute was not an example of a violation, but an incentive was incentivized by the company and by many different actors. And at the role of inter-organizational level that is composed of the set of collective actors who are responsible for control, regulation, no regulation for sale by salute. And so it is important to distinguish the role played by different levels, but at the same time, it's important to highlight the interaction between the levels and not just the sequence. So, an important scholar, Jim Reason, provided this model, the Swiss cheese model of accident causation. The model visualizes accident as occurring when multiple holes in different layers of defenses, like slices of Swiss cheese, align, allowing a hazard to pass through. In other words, each slide represents a protective barrier, such as training, procedures, equipment, or technology, while the holes in the cheese symbolize weaknesses within these barriers. Active failures and organizational failures can create serious weaknesses within and between the protective layers. And so for an accident to occur, the gaps and the weaknesses must align, creating a clear path through all layers of defense. So many criticalities, of course, at the sharp end, but at the same time, many criticalities at the blunt end. So, I would like to conclude saying that there are two different ways of looking at accident. The person approach, accusatory, that is typical of scapegoating, and the system or organizational approach, that is functional, that I think is more coherent with problem-solving sociology. In my opinion, of course. Each approach has its model of error causation, and each model gives rise to quite different philosophies of error management. Understanding these differences has important practical implications for coping with the ever-present risk of mishaps in organizations. The system approach, the person approach, focuses on individuals, asks who is guilty, and leads to scapegoating. And the remedial efforts are directed at the people at the sharp end. The system approach looks at the system and promotes learning, and the remedial efforts are directed at the people, at situations, not people, and organizations. The important question for the person approach, the important question is who is guilty, who should be punished. For system approach, organization approach, how and why did the defenses fail? What can we do to reduce the chances of a recurrence? So different analysis, different diagnosis, and different solutions. Because changing situations is more effective than trying to change human nature. Fallibility is a part of human nature, and we cannot change human nature, but we can change the conditions under which people work. Only by constantly seeking their vulnerabilities can organizations improve safety. And this brings us to learning. According to Argirs and Sean, we can distinguish single loop learning. The outcomes are bad, so we try to change actions and actor. And this is the single loop learning, very coherent with scapegoating. A double loop learning. In this case, we tend to, the goal of the analysis of the change is to modify the frames that can cause the action and so the bad outcomes. A double loop learning, I think, is more coherent with problem-solving sociology because it's attempted to change the latent factors, the organization, the practices, the activities, the incentives, administration, and so on. So, there are some limits of organizational change. One of the main limits is that we cope with systemic problems of an organizational nature with individual approaches and the solutions. But the final result is the inertia to change and the creation of scapegoats, of organizational scapegoat. And pursuing scapegoats without changing the system only ensure that the people will continue to behave as they did before, without positive learning. So we need what Sheila Yazanov called the new civic epistemology. Let me conclude by stepping back. From the standpoint of problem-solving sociology, scapegoating represents the opposite of genuine problem-solving. Scapegoating offers moral clarity, emotional satisfaction, political convenience, but it blocks organizational learning and structural reform. The greatest risk is not human error, but is the way we explain human error. A society that prefers blame to inquiry will reproduce the very disasters it condemns. That, I would argue, is the real issue beyond the Costa Concordia accident. Thank you very much for your attention. If there are any questions, I'll be delighted to answer it.
Thank you, Maurizio. Thanks